going to bring the names of the officials. Good morning, folks. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds. Okay, folks, good morning. Ida B. Wells said, "The way to right wrongs is to shine the light of truth on them." My name is Barry Williams, and I'm a part of the coalition in Baltimore County. Ida B. Wells was one of the first and strongest voices of protest against lynchings. She believed that we could right the wrongs in life by shining a light on the injustices we see. She recognized lynchings not only an attack against individuals, but a dehumanizing act of mob violence against the peoplehood of African Americans. Thus, whenever possible, Ida B. Wells named the victims of racist violence and told their stories. Lynchings were violent and public events that traumatized black people throughout the country and were largely tolerated by local, state, and federal officials. Today, we remember the events that happened in 1885 to Howard Cooper with the placement of a marker. You will hear from a number of people, including Maryland's top officials in state and local government. I encourage you to hear the stories. We will start with the invocation by Reverend Hathaway.
Good morning. But it's indeed an honor and pleasure for me to be here. My name is Reverend Hathaway. I'm the 10th pastor of Union Baptist Church that has been in this community for 169 years. Why that is significant is that our 5th pastor, the Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson, in June of 1855, created what then was known as the Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty. And he led the drive to raise funds to attempt to overturn the decision that was made in terms of Cooper. Though he was not successful, that organization continued on and became the prototype for the NAACP. So in his honor, I stand here just in that honor of activism coming from the faith community that has always sought to address injustice wherever it was. Let us pray. God, in your divine providence, you allow us to experience moments when life's journey took humanity to dark places, places where wrong was on the throne and justice stood in the shadows of the dim unknown. 136 years ago, a dark moment happened on a dark day at this place. We thank you for the opportunity to write a new chapter in the dreadful experience, an experience when humanity was not operating at its best self, but at its worst self, when injustice was seen through the lens of racial inequity and brutality. We are here on this day at this place to finish the story by remembering the past, by addressing the injustice, but focusing our eyes on the future, a future where we experience the power of judgment running down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream, a future where we are human enough to admit mistakes and transparent enough to learn from them. We thank you for the sunshine that illuminates this dark day, this place, and we promise to always walk in the light of your goodness and mercy that follows us all the days of our lives. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Hathaway. It's amazing as you were talking about letting the light shine, and the sun started to come out then. So you have some kind of power.
That's the power of the divine.
The power of the divine. Thank you. Thank you. We were to have had a solo by Dr. Malvern Statham, and she was looking forward to being here. I got a call very early this morning that she was taken to the hospital late last night and admitted. And so we will not be favored with her her voice. And so I will ask Will Schwartz, president of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, to come forward. Thank you. Not asking you to sing.
I want to make sure. Thank you. So thank you everybody for showing up today. I'm overwhelmed by the number of people who showed up and the reception that all of our work has had over the years. Is there a volume thing on this? I'm told that we need more. All right. Whatever. Before I begin, I do want to recognize that there's so many people who were involved in getting us to this day, and there's some people in particular that I need to thank. Yes, I'm doing my best. I'll begin with Troy Williams and Amy Millen, who are co-leaders of this coalition, and they've done just a spectacular job holding this thing together for over a year as we tried to sit out the COVID thing, and they've been wonderful. And also Nancy Goldring, who's recently ascended to leadership of the coalition as well. She's been an inspiration, and I can't thank her enough for joining us. I also need to mention Carol Brooks, who carried this thing on her back for quite a while and contributed so much. And Carol, thank you. John Billingsley from Baltimore County Public Schools. He was ran the essay contest portion of this thing, which was incredibly important, and we'll be hearing from the winning essayist in a little while. And then there's some other names of people who are the hardcores who have always answered the bell. In fact, they've answered before the bell in many occasions. So I want to recognize Bev Bickle and David Troskello, Joan Bryan, Cynthia DeJesus, Jessica Mendoza, Sue Royer, who is Iraq, Linda Shope, Stephanie Kimmons, Danielle Singley, Carolyn and Toby Ty, Carla Tucker, and Stacy Wallace. Thank you for bearing with that. I also want to just mention and thank all the supporters that we have all over the state and in all the coalitions all over Maryland. This is not something that is unique to Baltimore County. It's going on in 14 different counties, our coalitions that are working on this work, and I really think that having so many people, having so many groups draw attention to this issue is helping all of us. And so I want to salute them and all the people who have helped us get to where we are in the last 3 years. I also need to thank Elliot Spillers, who unfortunately I don't think he's arrived yet. Elliot Spillers and Bree Lampkin from EJI, who have been incredible partners for us and for all the coalitions in Maryland. I want to thank County Executive for being here, for the incredible support that he's given us from the very beginning. It's been extraordinary and it's much appreciated. And of course the governor. You know, we are still the first and only state in the country that has a Lynching, Truth, and Reconciliation Commission. And I think that's something to be proud of. And I really appreciate it. So I just have a couple of other things I want to say. You know, I feel today like my grandmother was a kind of a person who took great joy in the success and of others and the happiness of others. And I feel like I'm channeling her today a little bit, because I do want to mention that Michelle St. Pierre is somewhere. She worked with, there she is. She worked with a group of 8th graders in her juvenile justice class at Loch Raven Technical Academy, and the governor is here, and you'll know why in a little while. There's something particular that he's here for, and I want you to know that the germ of this, what I think is going to be a pretty momentous occasion, started with the 8th graders at Loch Raven Technical Academy, and I'm so proud of them. You know, that it took a lot of courage to take something like this on, and they are to be applauded, indeed. Jenny Lyles is a public historian who was at the soil collection here a few years ago, took some soil right down there, and after that soil collection, she set about finding about what she could learn about Howard Cooper and his family. And it is because of her work that we know so much more about him. We would not have known that he was only 15 years old at the time of his lynching, had it not been for her work. And she's been relentless and so dedicated, and I want to thank her, because we know so much about this story thanks to her. And then finally, I am so happy that Mr. Lewis Diggs has joined us today and is able to be here. This man is a treasure. He has been the historian, pardon? Oh, there he is. Good. For Baltimore County, for so long, he's written over a dozen books, 13 or 14 books. He is an inspiration. I feel so fortunate to have met him and to be able to learn from him. And on top of that, he's an incredible gentleman. And so, Mr. Diggs, thank you so much, and thank you for being here. So, thank you for bearing with all of that. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about Howard Cooper and about why remembering his story is so important to us today. Many of you may know, are familiar with the Valley Inn over on Falls Road, just north of Old Court. Right across the street from the inn, there's an old house that looks like a railroad station because it was a railroad station. And on April 2nd in 1855, Katie Gray, who was a 22-year-old woman, and his family lived not too far from the station, she dropped her sister off at the station and then started to walk home through the woods. Somewhere on her way home, she encountered Howard Cooper, who I think we would describe today as a troubled child. The two had to have known each other in some fashion, but we can't really know how exactly. We don't know really what happened in the woods that day, but Howard later did admit to assaulting the woman. And a news report said that one of the family's dogs interrupted a struggle in the woods and scared Howard away. Katie ran home, and almost as soon as she got there and told her father, a search party was scouring the countryside looking for Howard Cooper. Now, even before he was captured, there were notices in the paper saying he was going to be lynched. There was no presumption of innocence. And after 5 days, Cooper was found hiding in a stable on the farm of Edward Ryder, a familiar name in this town. He was brought here to the Baltimore County Jail. Sheriff Knight recognized that public sentiment was so inflamed that Cooper's life was in jeopardy here. And so he had him transferred to the Baltimore City Jail. The next month, in May, Howard was tried for assault, which he admitted, and rape, which he denied. And it's important to note that the young woman never testified that she had been raped. And the reason the charge is critical is because it triggered the death penalty. Howard was found guilty of both charges. Jury didn't even bother leaving the courtroom. They reached their verdict in less than a minute, according to the newspapers. And the next day in the very same courtroom, Howard was sentenced to death. His lawyers appealed the verdict to the state's highest court, claiming his 14th Amendment rights had been violated because blacks were not allowed to serve on juries in Maryland. He was denied due process. And although they didn't really expect that appeal to succeed, it did buy them time to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they thought that argument might meet a more friendly reception. In fact, predictably, the Maryland appeal failed, and Governor Henry Lloyd set an execution date for the end of June. Cooper was then transferred back here from the city jail. Now, meanwhile, there was a campaign underway to fund that Supreme Court appeal, and it was being managed by the Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson that Reverend Hathaway just told you about, who was at the time the pastor of the Union Baptist Church in Baltimore. Now, that effort worried people here. It caused a lot of resentment and fear here in the county because they didn't know what the Supreme Court might do, and they were worried that the verdict would be overturned. And they didn't want to risk it, so they took matters into their own hands. On Saturday, July 11th, it was announced that Dr. Johnson had raised the needed funds, and the appeal was already prepared, and that probably was the last straw. The next night, which was Sunday, July 12th, a mob of about 50 masked men gathered here at the jail. They were determined there would be no appeal. They waited until midnight because they didn't want to do a lynching on a Sunday. So shortly after 12, several of the mob went up to the courthouse. They got a flagpole, which they brought back down here and used it to break down the rear door of the jail. Cooper was found in his cell, hiding under his mattress. And when the mob dragged him out of the door and outside, he already had a noose around his neck. They hanged him from a sycamore tree that stood somewhere close to this very spot, actually. It was, according to one witness, an orderly and expeditious affair. For Howard Cooper, it was probably also a prolonged and very painful death. Unlike most lynching victims who have their neck broken instantly, he was asphyxiated, and we've seen how long that takes. When they were satisfied that Cooper was dead, the mob disbanded. They went back to their homes, but they left his corpse hanging from the tree right here. And now there used to be, I don't know how many people know, but there used to be a railroad right behind this building, really close to the building, actually, this side of Towson Town Boulevard, and it ran up to a station up on Susquehanna Street. So the next morning, the train slowed so that people on the cars could have a look at Howard Cooper's corpse. His mother, Henrietta, collected his remains around noon and buried her son in an unmarked grave in Ruxton. Now, the papers of the day reported Howard's age to be anywhere between 19 and 25, but thanks to the efforts of Jenny Lyles, we know that he couldn't have been older than 15 on the night that he was murdered. Now, I've lived here for about 45 years, and I've never heard that story until about 3 years ago. And I can't drive by the building anymore without thinking of his mother having to summon the strength and courage to present herself here that day to retrieve her murdered child's body. It's haunting, and it's heartbreaking. At that time, by the way, Henrietta lived on the Bosley farm, which is really right over the fence here. The part of that property at the time was right here, so she was close. And an item in the paper said that she could hear horsemen on their way to Towson from her home that night. And she had to have known their purpose. She had to have known. And so did the black communities in Towson. Sandy Bottom, which was up that way, and East Towson, right over here. And they were, and so it's right that we take him into our hearts today. But that, and you know, the fact that everyone knew, that really is the point of a lynching, right? I mean, it was a terrorist act. It was meant to incite fear. It was an explicit threat and a very public message. So while we take Howard into our hearts today, it's important that we not lose sight of the fact that he was not the only victim of that crime. His mother, his family, his neighbors, all of the people of East Towson and Sandy Bottom, they were victims too. Can you imagine what life was like for those people? Seeing the savagery in front of their eyes, hearing it from their homes, knowing that they could be next and that there was nothing they could do about it. And it all happened right here. This is the stage where that tragedy played out. A child was lynched right here. Why would we ever want to forget that? Well, we're here today to make sure that no one does forget it. We want people to know what happened here. This story, Howard Cooper's story, and thousands like it, this history of terror and torture and death and unspeakable cruelty, this history that we inflicted this on our own people. For centuries, it's been denied or dismissed or swept to the side of the road. And I want people who see this building to think of Henrietta Cooper coming to collect her son's remains that day. We need to remember that. And by we, I hope no one's offended, but I mean white people. Because I don't think that black people have forgotten about this. In fact, Sherilyn Ifill wrote, the memory of lynching is indelibly engraved on the collective psyche of blacks. The memory of lynching is indelibly engraved. I think it's a fragile and sacred memory. And in her book, On the Courthouse Lawn, she also writes that lynching is local, and so must reconciliation be. She says, projects of reconciliation demand that individuals and communities demonstrate the willingness to confront painful truths, to acknowledge painful truths, and to take responsibility for injustice. Just as lynching is local, reconciliation is local. And that's why we're here at this spot. This is a project of reconciliation, and today we're acknowledging this painful truth about what happened here in our community right under our feet. But that's just a first step. We need to take responsibility for injustice as well. And that sometimes is a more difficult task, but one that we commit ourselves to today. It involves understanding that the legacy of lynching continues to damage us. The murders of George Floyd and others are obvious examples, but there are less obvious ways too. The rates of sickness and death from COVID, much higher in the black community than in the white community. The spate of new laws that are being targeted at black voters. These are also expressions of white supremacy, and we need to recognize them as that. A woman named Barbara Smith draws a really helpful distinction between white supremacy and racism. Institutionalized white supremacy does not require bigotry in order to function. She likens it to an operating system. It's the default setting. And I think this is helpful because it uncouples intent from effect. And I want to give you a quick example of how that's playing out right here in East Towson. Many of you know the community was settled by men and women, many of whom were formerly enslaved by the Ridgely family at the Hampton Plantation right up Delaney Valley Road. Like poor black communities everywhere, East Towson over the years has become the repository for development projects no one else wanted. When Towson needed a bypass, we'll put it through East Towson. When BGE needed a substation, we'll level some homes and we'll destroy a ballpark. When Black & Decker wanted a parking lot, well, you get the picture. So what was once a vibrant community, which has been articulately and beautifully recounted by Mr. Diggs, that community has now been reduced to about 6 blocks, and it is now threatened with extinction by plans to build a massive affordable housing project right in the middle of the neighborhood in the last green space. So here is the difference between white supremacy and racism. Here's where it comes in. I would not suggest for a moment that the proponents or developers of Red Maple Place are racists. But I do believe it's worth asking the question whether cramming a massive brutalist building into a sliver of a lot against the overwhelming wishes of the residents in an historic neighborhood that has been repeatedly abused, whether that might not fairly be seen as an expression of white supremacy. That is the default setting. We'll put it in East Towson. And that's the kind of question I think this moment calls for. It may be that this is not an affordable housing issue, but rather a social justice issue. And it's one directly related to the reason we're all here. Today we honor and remember a victim of the most virulent weapon of white supremacy. Another way to honor Howard Cooper would be to honor his community by finding a solution that doesn't require destroying what's left of East Towson. The people who lived there on the night Howard Cooper was lynched, they have descendants who still live there. It's time, I think, to give that neighborhood the dignity and respect it deserves. Reconciliation is local. We dismantle white supremacy piece by piece, and I would like to suggest that would be a good place to start. I feel you. So, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being here to stand for Howard Cooper and for Henrietta Cooper and for the thousands of African American lynching victims, their families, and their communities. Thank you. Did I go a little over?
15 minutes.
Oh. Well, I took Charlotte's time.
Thank you, Will. Before we get into the other folks who are going to be speaking, I want to acknowledge a good number of the folks who are here, dignitary elected officials. So starting with our own Governor Hogan, County Executive John Ushesky, Attorney General Brian Frosch, Speaker of the House Adrian Jones, Baltimore County Scott Schellenberger, Judge Judith Enser, former Delegate Dan Morheim, Senator Shelley Heddleman, the Honorable Robert Cahill, former Attorney General Doug Gansler, Judge Stacey Mayer, Senator Christopher West, Delegate Eric Ebersol, the chair of the Maryland Truth and Reconciliation Commission, David Funkenley, Judge Michael Reed, Chairman of the Baltimore County Council, Julian Jones, and County Administrative Officer Stacy Rogers. And now it's my pleasure to bring forth our very own governor, Governor Larry Hogan.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much, Barry. It may be a little cloudy today, but it's a beautiful day for all of us to be together. I want to begin by thanking everyone at the Equal Justice Initiative and the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project for all of their hard work that has helped lead us to this historic and momentous occasion. I want to thank all the elected officials and dignitaries who are here, and to thank each and every one of you for being here and being a part of this. Every morning when I walk to our historic State House, I pass through Lawyers Mall, which is a memorial honoring Thurgood Marshall, the first African American to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, and a great Marylander. Inscribed on that statue in Annapolis are the very same words that are inscribed on the entrance to the United States Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Equal justice under law. This is the enduring principle that our nation was founded on, and they are words that we strive to live up to each and every day. But there was nothing equal, just, or lawful about the way Howard Cooper's life was taken so violently and so senselessly by an angry mob, unwilling to give him the due process he was entitled to. His body was left there on display until his mother had to retrieve him. Pieces of the rope used to kill him were passed out as souvenirs. Earlier this year, as planning was underway for today's ceremony, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project sent me a petition which originated with Michelle St. Pierre's students at Loch Raven Technical Academy. The request asked me to consider granting a pardon posthumously for Howard Cooper in light of the fact that he was never afforded due process under the law. And I was so inspired by that group of young middle school students, because we have no greater responsibility as leaders in a democracy than preserving for future generations the importance of clearly differentiating the difference between right and wrong, and the power of speaking out in the face of injustice. After a thorough examination of the facts and the details found in history, and with much thoughtful consideration and in the interest of equal justice under law, I have made the decision to grant a posthumous pardon today for Howard Cooper. And studying this case led me to dig deeper and to seek out details, to investigate and to review the details of all the cases of the injustice of lynching in Maryland. And as a result of that work, today I am also granting pardons to all the 34 victims of racial lynching in the state of Maryland, which occurred between 1854 and 1933. The state of Maryland has long been on the forefront of civil rights, dating back to Justice Thurgood Marshall's legal battle to integrate the schools and our national reckoning on race. Today, we are once again leading the way, as together we continue the work to build a more perfect union. Today, the pardons that I am signing and granting would not have been possible without all those historians and leaders who have worked so hard over the years to bring this painful legacy of racial lynching to the forefront. My hope is that this action will at least in some way help to right these horrific wrongs, and perhaps to bring a measure of peace to the memories of these individuals and to their descendants and their loved ones. So, on this day, May 8th, 2021, therefore, I, Lawrence J. Hogan, Jr., Governor of the State of Maryland, by the power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 20 of the Constitution of Maryland, do hereby absolve the following persons from the guilt of their criminal offenses and exempt them from any penalties imposed upon them. Howard Cooper, David Thomas, Jim Wilson, Isaac Moore, Jim Quinn, Thomas Jurix, John Jones, John Henry Scott, John Sims, Mike Green, James Carroll, George Peck, John Diggs Dorsey, George Briscoe, Townsend Cook, Charles Whitley, Benjamin Hance, John Biggus, Asbury Green, James Taylor, Isaac Kemp, Stephen Williams, Jacob Henson, James Bowens, Sidney Randolph, William Andrews, Garfield King, Wright Smith, Lewis Harris, Henry Davis, William Burns, King Johnson, George Armwood, and lastly, a 13-year-old boy named Frederick, whose full name was lost to history, but whose in memory that we are also restoring today. And I will now sign these pardons. God bless all of you, and God bless the great state of Maryland.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for saying their names. We are also honored to have Congressman John Sarbanes with us. Our next speaker is Baltimore County's very own County Executive John Ushesky.
Good morning to all, and Governor, thank you so much for that decision. I want to commend you and lift that up. That is a wonderful testament to today and what today represents. I want to thank everyone for your presence here this morning. I'm so grateful for all of the hands that came together to make this day possible and to support the creation of this memorial, to further advance equity and racial justice in Baltimore County and beyond. I'm honored to be here with Governor Hogan, Speaker Jones, Attorney General Frosch, Will Schwartz, President of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, so many other elected officials and community leaders. Thank you all for being here. I am proud to stand with you as we work together to shine a light on the past transgressions, as we also work together towards racial justice, because we can only move forward when we shine a light on the darkest chapters of our history. I want to thank you all for being here and for your efforts to helping shine that light. Baltimore County, like so many parts of our country, has a long and painful history of systemic racism, and it's important that we come together and reflect on that past. So I'm grateful for the Baltimore County Coalition of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project for continuing to uncover this history and to spark this much-needed community dialogue about what reconciliation looks like. Today we remember and honor Howard Cooper, a teenager who was lynched right here at the old Towson Jail in 1885. As was noted, at 15 years old, Howard was convicted of a crime by an all-white jury that deliberated for less than 1 minute. And we should let that sink in. Less than 1 minute. Later that night, a mob of 75 masked men took him from the Towson jail and murdered him before he had the opportunity to appeal his case to the Supreme Court. Fueled by hatred, these horrific crimes ended far too many lives and terrorized far too many people across our country. Atrocities like these were committed for far too long. From 1865 to 1950, more than 40 lynchings occurred here in Maryland. Locally, we know that one other victim in Baltimore County, William Ramsey, who was lynched in Rosedale in 1909, 24 years later. Sadly, these are just the cases that we know about. It's critical we have public memorials like these to stand as permanent reminders of the horrors that occurred across our country and right here in Towson. We are now just steps away from where decisions are made about the future of our county and the lives of our residents. The Circuit Court of Baltimore County is just right across the street. Baltimore County's historic courthouse, where our administration serves our residents and our legislature passes our laws, is just up the hill from this very spot. Standing close by, this memorial will serve as a reminder of the work still in front of us to end systemic racism and ensure equity for all of our residents. This memorial also represents a starting point in our collective journey from truth to reconciliation and healing for our communities. To that end, I'm further excited to announce Baltimore County's commitment to working with the Baltimore County Coalition towards the establishment of a Baltimore County Truth and Reconciliation Park. We will never forget these crimes, nor the intergenerational trauma they caused. It's heartbreaking to know the story of Howard Cooper's lynching and the lynching of so many others. But we have a responsibility to understand the past. We must acknowledge that traumatic legacy of racial terror lynchings. We have to have honest conversations about the deeply rooted challenges we face. For more than 400 years, since the first slaves were brought to this country, people of color have faced injustice. Even today, that legacy of systemic racism endures. We see it in the lasting impact of racist redlining practices. We've seen it during this pandemic, which has disproportionately harmed communities of color. And across this country, we have seen too many examples of Black and Brown communities who suffer at the hands of officers that failed to uphold the honor of their profession. Throughout our history, communities of color have consistently faced discrimination and disinvestment. These disparities grow and worsen without concerted efforts to address them. In our past 2 years in Baltimore County, we've taken a number of steps to fight these inequities. We hired Troy Williams to serve as our county's first Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And we established advisory councils to advance these causes within Baltimore County government and our communities. We passed the HOME Act to finally ban discrimination by source of income, which we know disproportionately affects Black residents. And last year, amid a call nationwide for police reforms, we passed the Smart Policing Act, banning chokeholds, requiring additional implicit bias and de-escalation trainings, and barring the county from hiring officers with records of misconduct. I also want to thank and acknowledge Speaker Jones for her leadership on police reform at the state level, along with our members of the Maryland General Assembly. We know that we've made considerable progress, but the work is far from done. We will continue making equity a cornerstone of Baltimore County government, including our vaccine distribution and our recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We know we won't be able to address these challenges and overcome them overnight, but we remain focused on ending these inequities and fighting for racial justice. The marker today will serve as a reminder of those past injustices and drive our work going forward. Together, we will continue working to fulfill the ideals of this county, that everyone deserves equal justice and equal opportunity. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your ongoing commitment to that goal and doing the work. Thank you.
Need to lower this for our next speaker, who will be and is the Speaker of the Maryland House of Delegates, Adrian Jones.
Okay. I'll repeat. One thing he forgot to say, that he's my brother. I will note my older brother. So, doing a wonderful job. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Those names that have already been announced, and those who are here that no one said your name, but we welcome you here and all that you do, because you do make a difference. I also want to thank both Governor Hogan and Attorney General Frost, Hogan for the pardon, and General Frost for coming to Baltimore County today to stand in acknowledgement of this historical atrocity. I also want to thank the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project and the Baltimore County Coalition of Maryland Lynching Project and the Equal Justice Initiative for all of your efforts that allows us to have this recognition today. I stand here today not as the first black speaker in Maryland history, but as a representative of Baltimore County, my home, the place where I attended college, where I worked at the historic Towson courthouse for 38 years under 6 different county executives, and a place where I continue to live and represent today. A place that has provided me with so much of what I have today, but also a place that has always had a complicated relationship with race. Howard Cooper was murdered. A 15-year-old child was murdered here by 75 men, too cowardly to show their faces as they watched a child die at their own hands, simply for being black. He sat alone in a jail cell, locked away from his family, as he heard an angry mob approaching in the pitch black of night. Take a minute to think of the terror that he must have felt as he could hear them approaching, 75 strong. Imagine the terror that you would feel as an adult, and then translate that to a child. Imagine how scary it must have been for him to be dragged into a crowd of dozens of grown men, yelling and screaming at him, only to feel the rough-hewn rope strung around his neck. Imagine the sheer panic that he must have felt, a child knowing that he was going to die. He was going to die before he even got started, simply because he was black. These are the stories that we must force ourselves to consider when we talk about our racist past. We cannot take the raw emotion out of it or shield ourselves from the reality of what happened across this state and this country. Maya Angelou once said, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." Memorializing the site where Howard Cooper was lynched gives us the opportunity to courageously confront the injustices of our past. Today is an important beginning. We have the governor of the state, the attorney general, the county executive, all white men who stand here with us today to say that this was wrong, that we should mark this spot, name it, and collectively acknowledge in order to move forward. into the next chapter. We are turning the page to the future where we put faces and names to these atrocities. Thank them for their unnecessary sacrifice and walk together into a future where we can dismantle artificial racism, where everyone, regardless of color, can have equal access and empowerment to succeed and equal treatment under the law. But we will not forget Howard Cooper. We will hold on to him in our hearts as we walk forward into a brighter future because of what we learned from him. Thank you. And at this time, if I could have a representative from both the Baltimore County Lynching Project and Equal Justice Initiative to come forward for a brief presentation. And thank you.
So, Will. Is Elliot?
I'm like the mom. They both say the same thing. And you can get the other one out. And it reads from the Maryland General Assembly. Fifth citation. Be it hereby known to all that sincere congratulations are offered to Baltimore County Coalition of the Maryland Lynching Project and the Equal Justice Initiative. In recognition of their work to advance the cause of racial reconciliation through documenting the history of racial terror in Maryland, memorializing the site where 15-year-old Howard Cooper was lynched on July 13th, 1885. In this public acknowledgement of the legacy of terror and is a reminder that truth is the first step towards reconciliation. My glasses face up. Presented on this 8th day of May, 2021 by yours truly, Adrian Jones, Speaker of the House. Okay. They're both the same. Thank you for all your work. Here you go.
Call you in a little bit.
Good afternoon. It's a great honor for me to be here this afternoon and to memorialize the terrible lynching that occurred, that was visited upon Howard Cooper and his family. I want to thank Barry Williams and your wonderful coalition, the Equal Justice Initiative. I'm proud to be here with Governor Hogan, County Executive Johnny Ushesky, and Speaker Adrian Jones, and I commend them on their support for this important work. And it is vital that all Marylanders understand this most atrocious period of our history and its brutal treatment of African Americans, men, women, and children. Racially provoked violence that we are reminded of today, but which persists in our society. I'm here also to say thank you to Governor Hogan for pardoning Howard Cooper and the other victims of lynching in Maryland. It's a wonderful thing. Thank you very much. I'm here to acknowledge not only that these injustices occurred, but that they often happened with the assistance of or complicity of elected officials and law enforcement, the very people who are supposed to serve to protect all members of our community. What happened to Howard Cooper at the door of this very courthouse 136 years ago was as far from justice as you can imagine. It was atrocious. It was murder. It was illegal. And it was a stain on our state, and one that we have to work every day to work to erase. I also want to acknowledge two people from my office, Zanita Hurley and Kristen McFarland. They are currently staffing the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they led the effort to secure a $300,000 grant for that commission to do its work. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that. I'm very proud of the work that our office has done to combat systemic racism. We were the first Attorney General's office in the country to issue guidelines that prohibit law enforcement officers from using racial profiling, discriminatory profiling in their work. We have required implicit bias training of all members of our office. We fought to eliminate the cash bail system in our state that falls hardest upon poor people and people of color. They're detained, held in jail, often for very minor offenses, had been at any rate, simply because they're poor. We also, thank you, we led the charge last year to eliminate the state law that allows our Department of Transportation to take away the driver's licenses of people who have committed minor traffic offenses but can't afford to pay the fines. And again, this falls most hardly on people of color. And you know, the law went into effect last October 1st. By November 1st, more than 90,000 people had had their driver's licenses restored. There are hundreds of thousands that have had them restored since then. I want to say that Howard Cooper's life was stolen. It was stolen from him. It was stolen from his family. It was stolen from society. It was stolen from all of us. And there is no society, there is no civilization where terrorism rules, where intimidation and hate and fear are sanctioned by those in power, or where violence replaces justice. I want to thank Congressman John Sarbanes. He is the author of H.R. 1. And among the many things that Congressman Sarbanes' bill will do will be to eliminate voter suppression across our nation. So thank you for that, Congressman Sarbanes. When our neighbors are the victims of hate or, God forbid, violence, none of us is free. None of us is safe. We must stand together, as we are today, to recognize and to fight back against hate, against domestic terrorism, against racism. I can promise you that my office will continue to do everything in our power to protect Marylanders from hate, to protect Marylanders from violence, and to deliver justice across our great state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney General. I know that Chief Melissa Hyatt was going to be the next speaker, but I know she had been called away on a very important detail, and I hope this doesn't float away from me. So I'm going to ask that Elliot Spillers come forward now. He is the project manager for the Equal Justice Initiative.
Hello. I bring you warm greetings from Montgomery, Alabama. On behalf of the Equal Justice Initiative and my colleague, Bree Lampkin. It is an honor to be with you all today to join the community of Baltimore and the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project in this historical moment. But this moment is not merely an admiration of this historical marker, but as a collective witness to the darkness that has been with us for far too long and is still with us today. A darkness that was present in 1860, as 87,000 enslaved black people were denied their humanity in Maryland. And in 1885, as local newspapers reported that 15-year-old Howard Cooper would be lynched. As an all-white jury found this black child guilty after less than a minute of deliberation. And there, still at that time, was the darkness, as the white mob abducted Howard from this jail and hanged him from a tree nearby. In both the past and the present, this darkness has shielded the many in this community from ever joining alongside the few in guarding against the terror that has been killing them for far too long. Born in Bethesda, Maryland to two Air Force officer parents, both born and raised in the segregated South, I know all too well the resiliency, power, and bravery that is required for protecting the land and the people from the terror of this darkness. The skill not only to have the faith to reimagine a world free from this suffering, but the strength to build the dream into existence, despite the reality that you and many others will likely never live to physically see this idea come to pass. Today, gathering alongside both the living and the dead, we carry the weapon of narrative in actively destroying the doubt, fear, hatred, despair, denial, and shame that has been trapped in the earth for far too long. Trapped beneath the very ground we stand on are the dreams of those who never lived to see the light of truth touch the buildings and institutions ensconced beneath the dark. EJI has been working in Montgomery, Alabama for the last 30 years to represent the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned in our society. EJI, through litigation efforts, works to end life without parole sentences for children convicted to die in prisons and jails today, inferior and white people as superior, that then led to the legitimization of chattel slavery here in America. Until we understand the totality of that context, can we then step into the era of Reconstruction in America, which was America's first opportunity at reenfranchising, but also legitimizing the humanity of its black citizens. But during this first moment of opportunity, our country failed in the work to completely restore the citizenship to black people in this country. EJI documents between the time period of 1865 to 1876, at least 2,000 black people were lynched across the United States in counties and communities where there were functioning court systems, functioning police institutions. Those institutions did not work to protect and defend the black people in their community. When we then step into this other era of racial terror lynching in this country, between 1876 to 1950, EJI documents at least 4,000 African American people to have been lynched across America. In states primarily in the Deep South, but in states in the Upper South, like Maryland, and in the Midwest, like Nebraska, in New York, in California, EJI documents another 400 at least black people that were lynched in these communities. When we step into the time period of the civil rights movement and Jim Crow segregation, we cannot begin to reconcile and understand the courage and the bravery that it took for civil rights foot soldiers and leaders to actually defend their humanity despite centuries of being oppressed, being told that they were less and that they were inferior. Today, when we look at our crisis of mass incarceration, and we see that there are 2.3 million people incarcerated in our prisons, primarily black and brown people, as an organization, we believe that this historical crisis that we're living in today is informed by America's legacy of racial terror and violence. Slavery did not end in 1865. It evolved, and it is still with us today, omnipresent with us in this moment, right now. When we think about our work, working with communities across the country, we are very intentional about beginning this process of repair. Today, let us be reminded of the work that is still left to be done, but also, how will we remember this moment? How will we remember this marker? How will we see this marker? Who is not here today in Baltimore County that should be here, joining us together, virtually or in person, that's not here understanding this truth? Before we can get to this process of healing, we have to understand the truth. Today, our justice is not true. Our justice system is not true. Let us move forward today earnestly to the pursuit of true justice in our society. The Equal Justice Initiative, in partnership with the Baltimore County Committee of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, is pleased to announce an upcoming scholarship contest that we have completed, thankfully. And this contest was for students in grades 9 through 12 who attend a public high school in the county. And we are proud to award $5,000 today across the winners of this contest. I think we have many of our finalists that are with us today. If you are, please, can you please stand up and be recognized? Thank you, guys. Students are asked to examine the history of a topic of racial injustice and to discuss its legacy today. Essays should explain the chosen topic using a specific historical event, explore how the injustice persists, and imagine solutions for a future free from racial injustice. Students are encouraged to reflect on how the topic impacts their own lives and communities. Communities across our nation have been profoundly impacted by the legacies of the eras of enslavement, racial terror, lynching, and segregation in ways that continue to influence our social, political, and personal practices and institutions. EJI and local communities are working together to help advance a more truthful understanding of our history through memorialization and community remembrance. We believe that a deeper understanding about our nation's history of racial injustice is important to addressing the contemporary questions of social justice and equality, and each project helps our nation participate more fully in a sequential process of truth and repair. So I will begin by announcing our honorable mentions. So I will say that we had a number of amazing essays that were submitted to this contest, and so all of you all should be proud. Those who did not make it to the finalist round, I just want to commend you on your essays. This was not a very easy decision to make. But I will begin with our first honorable mention. If you would, please just stand to the left of me once you've received your award, and then we can, I guess, do a picture afterwards. So the first person to receive an honorable mention is Leslie Mbiakope. Our next honorable mention is Luxell James Moliko Juba. Is Luxell with us today? Our next honorable mention is Brianna Clark. So our fifth place winner for our racial justice essay contest goes to Anaya Johnson. In fourth place, we have Sienna Franklin. Awesome. In third place, we have Avery Butler. Is Avery Butler with us today? Awesome. Awesome. Well done. In second place, the award goes to Fiona Simpavong. Fiona? Awesome. And in first place, the award goes to Tyrell Taylor. Come on, Tyrell. So, as part of the racial justice essay contest, the first place winner is asked to read their essay for you all today as a treat. So, Tyrell, if you would please join me up here. I have your essay right here too. Gotcha.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me up here. The name of my project is It's More Than Just a Vote. I'll start it now. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. With this quote in mind, injustice is defined as the lack of fairness or justice in an unjust act or occurrence. That is not based on or having what is considered morally right or fair. This essay will discuss and analyze the effects of voter suppression on African American citizens. Even though the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution of 1870 inspired the Voters' Right Act of 1965, which was ratified 95 years later. Voter suppression such as literacy tests and government oversight of African American voters showed that America was not ready for equal rights. Although the Voters' Right Act of 1965 was supposed to prevent voter suppression by banning literacy tests and providing federal oversight of voters registration to areas where less than 50% of the non-white population had not registered to vote. The 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote to men of all races, including former slaves, an opinion that by Chief Justice Roger Taney wrote that black people are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizen in the Constitution, and therefore cannot claim none of the rights and privileges that instrument provide for a secure and citizen and secure to citizen of the United States of America. Along with that, the court added, and any black colored person who attempted to try overruling these judgments would be enslaved for life. This example of historical injustice had a lasting impact on our current African American voters. For example, voters in Georgia are still fighting for their right to vote. New laws have stricter conditions, ID requirements, restrictions that will keep absentee ballots from being counted, and misdemeanor laws for offering food and drinks to individuals waiting to cast their vote. According to courts, 2021, these new laws will limit ballot access, potentially confuse voters, and give more power to Republican lawmakers. For example, in the 2020 election, President Donald Trump filed for emergency petitions with the Supreme Court for mail-in ballot recounts in several southern states and Nevada. In this recent election, 30% or more of the mail-in voters were from African American population. I believe Trump is claiming there was fraud in a national election that has been going on, that's been happening since 1788, is a crystal clear abuse of power. In my opinion, his behavior towards his defeat in the election can be used as an example of how African American people are not respected the same as white people. According to Dr. Abraham Jones of Woodlawn High School, which is in Baltimore, voter suppression is a strategy used to influence the outcome of an election by discouraging or preventing specific groups from voting. Voter suppression is effective when a significant number of voters are intimidated or disenfranchised. I cannot agree more, according to McKeever 2020. On August 12, 1890, more than 100 men gathered in the Mississippi State Capitol for a constitutional convention. In his opening speech, Judge Solomon Saladin Calhoun, president of the convention, charged the delegates with a single task: devise a way to keep black men from voting in Mississippi. African Americans are still fighting for our given rights. For instance, in the 2000 Nevada election, less than 5% of African Americans voted, whereas white. Population of Nevada percentage were over 70% of the vote. 18 years later, in the 2018 Nevada election, the rate for African American voters rose to 7%. That's just a 2-point increase. In conclusion, as a young black man in America, I do not believe that black people should have to repeat "I can't breathe" over 20 times while slowly getting closer and closer to their final breath. That Hispanic people should have to be locked in cages and separated from their families and loved ones because they want a better life in a country said to be the land of the free. I do not believe that Arabic Americans should be looked at with caution when in public because they're wearing a backpack, or be called suicide bombers or terrorists when they are just children who are not over the age of 10. I do not believe that Asian Americans should be subjected to racial bias slurs or murder because of their nationality. I do not believe that anyone should not be subject to being beaten, harassed, or murdered for supporting different ethnicities. Every problem involving racism makes it seem like we still have not gotten any further than we were over 400 years ago. We may get a little bit further in front of this battle against racism, but it has somehow found a way to ambush African Americans when it is least expected. We have tried peaceful protesting, rioting, asking Congress for help, making petitions along with other methods to stop these discriminatory practices. You would think we would have a country that respects each citizen regardless of their ethnical background, financial situations, religious or personal belief, the way their hairstyle, and the way they're dressed. It seems to me, in this most important aspect of American culture, out of these examples is the color of a person's skin. To me, it's more than just a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrell. I will share with you that we've had some pretty powerful speakers here from people in all levels of the government, but I am most encouraged when I hear young people speak and give evidence that they have studied, they have learned the issues, and they can articulate what's on their minds. So Terrell, thank you very much. So I'm going to be calling up Amy Millen, who's the co-leader of the Baltimore County Coalition of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project. While we are doing that, Carol Brooks, I'm going to ask if you could escort Mr. and Mrs. Diggs over to the marker because we are about that time. Just those two. The rest of you, I'm going to ask you to hold off and wait until I give further directions. Okay? Amy.
Good afternoon. Today is a momentous and historic day. Acknowledging the past and naming truth is the most important moment in the history of Towson, Baltimore County, and all of Maryland. Yet, the work is not done. Howard Cooper's memorial marker does just that. It marks, or symbolizes, the horrific acts of racial violence. The Baltimore County Coalition is committed to the ongoing work to confront the legacy of racial injustice that continues. As such, we extend an invitation to all of you to join in the work and to help create change. The Coalition offers several programming initiatives, such as a film series and an anti-racism book discussion group, as well as new initiatives, such as an annual spoken word event for 8th graders that will be coming in the near future, as well as plans for the Truth and Reconciliation Park that was announced earlier in the program, providing various platforms for conversation across all ages, races, and genders is part of the journey of truth and reconciliation, and as Elliot said earlier, repair. I encourage you to become a member of the Baltimore County Coalition of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project by finding us on the website, talking to me after this program, or returning to the information table to speak to a coalition member. Correcting the narrative and right-setting the future takes all members in all of our communities. I ask that you join in using your voice in these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So now I'm going to ask that those who spoke here at the podium leave now to go to the marker. You're going to be joining Louis Diggs. Louis Diggs has the honor that we have given him as being one of Baltimore County's most noteworthy historians, and particularly on the lives of African American people. And now those of you who are able-bodied and willing to walk toward the marker, we will have the unveiling of the marker, followed by singing This Little Light of Mine.
See you again. Thank you for everything.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Governor. I was looking where I was going to Where's she from?
My wife is from Korea, and every time she gets a chance, she thanks every single person who served there for protecting their freedom.
And I was the last on I think I'm the last man standing there.
Well, I'm so glad to see you here today.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Brian Frost, Attorney General.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say thanks so much for being here.
Yes. Okay. So, Lewis,
Yes, sir.
if you would be so kind.
It's right here. There's a handle right there.
Just give it a yank. One, two, three. All right, so folks, in your program, you will see all the writing that is on both sides of that. And it's pretty impressive. I think it's a great looking, beautiful marker. Well, particularly the language that's on it. It speaks to where we are now. So, as I shared with you before, I'm going to ask, because we have several different references to the light of truth, and that's why it's so appropriate for us to sing This Little Light of Mine, right? So if it just wants, so I'll give you directions on that too. We're going to do This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to let it shine, that gets repeated, and then we'll sing, the second verse will be All Around the World, I'm going to let it shine, and then you come back to This Little Light of Mine. Ready? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Thank you.
Good singer, yeah.
That was really good.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you. Folks, that's it. Thank you.
Let's see the other side. Thank you.